The evening rush at La Mer, a five-star restaurant perched above the glittering skyline, had a rhythm of its own: clinking glass, murmured laughter, and the hum of jazz that softened the air like velvet. But for Elena Moretti, the rhythm was a cage. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes, weaving between tables with the grace of someone who had learned to hide exhaustion behind a practiced smile. She was 27, sharp-eyed, quiet, and seemingly ordinary, a woman who knew how to disappear in plain sight. Until that night. Because that was the night Alexander Vance, the billionaire tech mogul whose name could make entire boardrooms hold their breath, sat down at table 17. He wasn't supposed to be there, not at La Mer, not unannounced, not without an entourage. Yet there he was, tall and magnetic, his cold gray eyes fixed on the skyline as though the world below were just another empire he had already conquered. "Good evening, sir," Elena said softly, setting down the wine list. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" He barely looked up. "Just the best you have." She nodded, suppressing the irritation that always sparked when someone treated her like she was invisible. "The best you have," she repeated silently. What did that even mean? The best champagne? The best service? Or just the best way to remind her she was beneath him? Minutes later, she returned with a glass of Chateau Margaux, one of the restaurant's most expensive selections. As she placed it before him, his gaze flickered to her name tag. "Elena," he said, tasting her name. "That's Italian, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. My mother was from Naples." He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing with faint interest. "Do you like working here?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers didn't ask. They ordered, they smiled, they left. But Alexander's tone wasn't curious. It was evaluative, like a man measuring the weight of a coin before deciding if it was worth keeping. "It pays the bills," she said carefully. He smiled faintly. "There are better ways to make money than serving tables." If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Elena tilted her head, something steely flashing in her eyes. "There are also worse ways, Mr. Vance." For the first time, his expression changed, amusement, maybe even surprise. Few people spoke to him that way. And then, as if fate were listening in, the restaurant manager appeared, whispering urgently in Elena's ear. "Table 24 just cancelled their wine order. Switch priorities, and make sure table 17 gets special attention." "I know who he is," she cut in quietly. When she turned back, Alexander was watching her with that calculating gaze again, the look of a man used to uncovering secrets. "Most people would have pretended not to know," he said. "I don't pretend well," Elena replied, her tone even. "And I don't bow easily, either." The faintest grin tugged at his lips. "Maybe that's why you're still here." Her eyes narrowed. "And maybe that's why you're still alone." The air between them thickened, the soft jazz fading into a hum behind her pounding heartbeat. He didn't reply immediately, just studied her, really studied her, as if trying to decipher what language she was speaking beneath her words. Then came the moment that would change everything. As he reached for his drink, his phone buzzed, a live call, the name on the screen flashing, "Board Conference, Tokyo." He ignored it. Instead, he leaned back and asked, "Tell me, Elena, if you weren't a waitress, what would you be doing right now?" Her voice dropped lower, steadier. "Speaking at the United Nations." He blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry." She didn't flinch. "You asked. That's my answer. I studied international linguistics, 5 languages fluently, working on my 6th. I wanted to be a translator for global diplomacy." Something changed in his face, a flicker of disbelief, maybe admiration, maybe something deeper. "And yet," he murmured, "you're here." "And yet," she said, "you're drinking alone." The words landed like a quiet storm. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of conversation around them went on, oblivious to the tension that had formed between two strangers who suddenly saw far too much of each other. When she turned to leave, Alexander's voice followed her softly. "You said 5 languages. Which ones?" She looked over her shoulder, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "English, Italian, French, Arabic, and Russian." But the one you seem to understand best is pride. And just like that, she walked away, leaving him frozen in silence, his reflection staring back at him through the dark surface of his untouched wine. For a man who had built his empire on power and precision, Elena's words cut deeper than any negotiation ever had. He didn't know it yet, but that conversation would be the first domino in a chain that would unravel both their worlds. Have you ever met someone who challenged your assumptions with just a few words? Someone who made you see yourself differently? Share your thoughts below. Who was that person for you? When Elena stepped out of La Mer that night, the rain had already started to fall, soft, cold, and relentless. She didn't bother with an umbrella. The city lights blurred around her as she walked, her reflection stretching across wet pavement like a ghost she no longer recognized. For 3 years, she had lived in this rhythm. Early mornings at the community college for language tutoring, afternoons spent running errands for her mother, and evenings at the restaurant serving the wealthy who didn't see her. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, not after earning her master's degree in linguistics with honors, not after the scholarships, the dreams, the ambition. But life, she'd learned, had a way of humbling even the brightest minds. Her mother's stroke had changed everything. In a matter of weeks, Elena went from being a rising academic to a caretaker drowning in bills. Dreams had to wait. Survival couldn't. Inside their tiny apartment, her mother, Lucia Moretti, was propped up on a couch surrounded by medical paperwork. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and hospital disinfectant. "You're late again," Lucia murmured, her voice weak but teasing. "Traffic," Elena lied with a tired smile, hanging her damp coat by the door. She sat beside her mother, gently adjusting her blanket. "How was therapy today?" "Same as always. My body's stubborn, but my spirit still dances," Lucia said, tapping her chest. "And you, my little professor? Still serving the powerful their dinners?" Elena gave a small laugh. "Something like that." Lucia's eyes softened. "You deserve more, figlia mia. Don't let this city make you forget that." But Elena had already learned that forgetting was a form of survival. That night, long after her mother had fallen asleep, Elena sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook open before her. Not a diary, but a collection of unfinished dreams. Notes from old research projects. Words in Arabic she hadn't practiced in months. A letter she'd written to herself, never sent, titled, "When the Time Comes." Her mind kept circling back to Alexander Vance, the way he'd looked at her, not as a waitress but as someone he couldn't quite categorize. The conversation replayed in her head like a song she couldn't turn off. "The one you seem to understand best is pride." She'd meant it as a jab, but it had landed too cleanly, too truthfully. Across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the same skyline, Alexander sat alone at a marble counter, the untouched glass of Chateau Margaux still half full beside him. His assistant, Cameron, had long gone home, leaving him in a rare pocket of silence. He wasn't used to silence. For a man who ran multinational companies, his world was a symphony of calls, deals, and meetings. He thrived in control, every decision, every risk, calculated. But tonight, something as small as a waitress's defiance had shaken that control. He had met countless people who wanted something from him: influence, money, recognition. But Elena hadn't wanted a thing. She'd spoken like someone who didn't need his approval. And that unnerved him more than he cared to admit. He opened his laptop, pulling up a background check on La Mer's staff, an old habit. Within minutes, he found her record: Elena Moretti. Age 27. Born Naples, Italy. Moved to New York at 14. Graduated Columbia University, M.A. Linguistics. His brow furrowed. Why would someone like that be waiting tables? He scrolled further. A father deceased, a mother in rehabilitation, several years of gaps in employment. No criminal record. No red flags. Just wasted potential. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he closed the laptop. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe, somewhere beneath the armor of his success, he recognized a kind of hunger that mirrored his own, the hunger to matter. The next day, Elena's shift began at noon. She arrived early, as always, tying her apron with mechanical precision. Her co-worker Jess, bubbly and loud, was already gossiping near the coffee machine. "You won't believe this," Jess whispered. "That billionaire from last night, he's back." Elena froze. What? Jess grinned. Yep. Same table. Same order. And he asked for you. Elena's stomach twisted. Probably just wants to complain about the service. Jess laughed. Girl, if I had $1 for every customer who complained their way into your section, I'd be rich. Elena rolled her eyes but couldn't shake the nervous flutter in her chest. When she approached table 17 again, Alexander was there, impeccably dressed, unreadable as ever. Good afternoon, Mr. Vance, she greeted professionally. Back so soon. I believe I owe you an apology, he said, surprising her. I may have been discourteous last night. Elena blinked. You weren't the worst I've dealt with. He smirked faintly. That's not the standard I aim for. Then maybe aim higher, she replied, arching an eyebrow. He laughed, a low, genuine sound that startled even him. Fair enough. Actually, I came because I wanted to offer you something. She frowned. If this is about money. It isn't, he interrupted quickly. It's about language. That caught her attention. I have a deal with a foreign investor, a company in Dubai, he explained. We're in the final stages, but the translation work has been subpar. My assistant mentioned you're fluent in Arabic. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. You checked my background? He hesitated. I check everyone I work with. Except I don't work for you. Not yet, he said quietly. The silence between them stretched. The offer hung in the air, tempting, dangerous, uncertain. She wanted to say no. She wanted to protect the fragile balance of her life. But behind her eyes flickered her mother's tired face, the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, and the echo of her own voice whispering from her old letter, when the time comes. Maybe this was it. All right, she said finally. I'll help, but only professionally. No favors, no strings. Of course, Alexander said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. If you were in Elena's place, torn between pride and opportunity, would you have accepted the offer? Why or why not? Share your thoughts below. 2 days later, Elena found herself standing in front of the Vance Global Enterprises Tower, 58 stories of glass and power, piercing the sky like a monument to ambition. She hesitated before stepping inside, clutching her worn leather bag as if it could shield her from the opulence that waited beyond. It wasn't that she didn't belong in such a place intellectually. She had once dreamed of walking into buildings like this as a consultant or researcher. But not like this. Not as a waitress-turned-translator being given a chance by a billionaire who made empires out of people's second chances. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and minimalist art. The receptionist, perfectly manicured, greeted her with a polite but puzzled smile. Miss Moretti, Mr. Vance is expecting you. Top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. As numbers lit up one by one, she could almost hear her mother's voice. Remember who you are. Don't let anyone talk to you like you're small. When the doors finally opened, Alexander was already there, leaning casually against the glass wall that overlooked half of Manhattan. Elena, he said with that measured calm of his. Right on time. I wasn't sure if this was an interview or an ambush, she replied, crossing her arms. He chuckled softly. Depends on how well you translate under pressure. He gestured for her to follow him into his office, a vast space filled with books, screens, and the quiet hum of wealth. On the desk sat a laptop, a stack of papers, and a sleek tablet displaying Arabic documents. These, he explained, are the negotiation drafts with Al Masri Holdings. Their CEO, Khalid Rahman, prefers to communicate in Arabic. We've been relying on software translations, and it's embarrassing. Elena scanned the text for only a few seconds before grimacing. Embarrassing is an understatement. Your system translated mutual partnership as conditional surrender. That's practically an insult. Alexander blinked. You're kidding. She shook her head. If you'd sent this, the deal would have collapsed in minutes. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. You just saved me a multi-million-dollar disaster. I'd say that's worth at least a thank you, she said dryly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief second, something unguarded crossed his expression. Thank you, Elena. It wasn't just words. It was respect. Genuine, reluctant, earned. As hours passed, they worked side by side. Alexander watched in quiet fascination as she navigated complex diplomatic phrases with effortless precision. Her voice softened when she explained nuances of tone and formality, not mechanical, but passionate, as if every word carried the weight of her soul. At one point, he asked, "How did you learn to hear languages like that, not just speak them?" She smiled faintly without looking up. Because words are never just words. They're promises, weapons, or bridges. Sometimes all at once. Her answer lingered with him. By the time evening rolled around, the skyline had melted into gold and indigo. Elena stretched, gathering her notes. "I think I've done what I can for today." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've done more than I expected." "Then lower your expectations next time," she said, smiling just enough to soften the edge. He laughed quietly. "You know, most people in this office don't talk to me that way." "Maybe that's the problem," she said, meeting his gaze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two opposites circling something they couldn't yet name. Then Alexander's intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice cut through the moment. "Sir, Mr. Rahman is on the line. He's asking about the new translator." Alexander looked at Elena. "Would you take the call?" She froze. "You want me to?" "You're the expert," he said simply. With a slow breath, she took the headset. The voice on the other end was deep, accented, and commanding. "Who am I speaking with?" "This is Elena Moretti," she replied in fluent Arabic. "I've been assisting Mr. Vance with your proposal." There was a brief pause. Then, in Arabic, "At last, someone who understands the difference between formality and respect." Alexander watched as she navigated the conversation with poise and subtlety, translating complex details without missing a beat. Her confidence radiated through her tone, not forced, not rehearsed. Pure authenticity. When the call ended, Khalid Rahman said warmly, "Tell Mr. Vance he finally hired someone worth his reputation." When she hung up, Alexander exhaled with quiet amazement. "That was incredible." She smiled faintly. "That was just a warm-up." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a knock. Cameron, his assistant, stepped in, carrying a folder. "Sir, the Tokyo board needs your approval for the merger contract." Alexander nodded absently, his eyes still on Elena. "Later." Cameron glanced between them, sensing something unsaid but wisely choosing silence. "Very well." When the door closed, Elena gathered her things again. "Well, Mr. Vance, looks like your empire's safe, for now." "Stay for dinner," he said suddenly. She hesitated, caught off guard. "Dinner." "Business dinner," he clarified, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "There's a restaurant downstairs." "You've earned it." Her instinct screamed no. Lines blurred easily in his world. But part of her, the part that longed for more than survival, whispered yes. "All right," she said finally. "But I'm paying for my own meal." He grinned. "You really don't make it easy, do you?" "I'm not supposed to." As they stepped into the elevator, the city stretched before them in a sea of lights. For Alexander, it was another evening of business. For Elena, it was the start of something far more dangerous, and far more human. Do you believe fate brings people together for a reason, or is it all just coincidence and timing? Let me know your take in the comments below. Dinner that night wasn't what Elena expected. The restaurant inside the Vance Tower, the Azure Room, was sleek and silent, built more for deals than dates. The tables were wide apart, the waiters invisible, and the view of the city almost too perfect, like a painting of control. Alexander sat across from her, still wearing his power like a second skin. But something about his demeanor was different, less guarded, more curious. "You don't strike me as someone who likes fine dining," he said lightly as they were served. "I don't strike you as a lot of things, apparently," Elena replied. He smiled. "Touché. What do you prefer, then?" She looked out the window, the skyline reflected in her eyes. "Street food. Loud places. Where people talk with their hands more than their mouths." He laughed, genuine and warm. "You're full of contradictions." "No," she said softly. "Just full of stories no one asks to hear." That silenced him. After dinner, he walked her to the lobby. "You know," he said, pressing the elevator button, "if the translation project goes well, there could be a long-term role for you here. International communications. Real pay. Real impact." She looked at him carefully. "And what would you want in return?" "Results," he said simply. "Nothing else." But in his eyes, something unspoken lingered, something that made her heart skip once, then again. The next few weeks unfolded like a strange dream. By day, Elena returned to La Mer for her shifts, pretending the billionaire upstairs didn't exist. By night, she worked at his office, translating documents, emails, and live negotiations. Their partnership was efficient, electric, dangerous. She admired his intellect, even his precision. He admired her honesty, the way she could slice through corporate jargon and reveal the human meaning beneath. But with admiration came something else, a pull neither wanted to name. One evening, after a particularly long call with the Dubai team, Alexander leaned back and said, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The world you studied for. The career you gave up." She hesitated. "Every day." "Then why not chase it again?" She laughed quietly. "Because reality doesn't wait for dreamers." He frowned. "Reality bends for those who make it." She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Easy to say when you own reality." That earned her another laugh, but this time it faded quickly. "You think I own reality?" he asked, his tone softer. "Don't you?" "No," he said after a pause. "I just rent it. Success isn't ownership, it's temporary custody." Something about that confession unsettled her. It sounded too honest for someone like him. Before she could reply, Cameron walked in, holding a thin file. "Sir, there's something strange with the Al-Masri documents." Alexander motioned for him to continue. Cameron placed the file on the desk. "One of their clauses, the one Elena translated last week, it's been altered. The version in their email doesn't match the one we sent." Elena frowned, leaning forward. "That's impossible. I reviewed it twice." "I thought so too," Cameron said. "But look, here's the version on our servers, and here's what they acknowledged." She scanned both documents. The Arabic phrasing had shifted subtly, a single word changed. But that word meant everything. In English, it turned shared development rights into exclusive foreign control. Alexander's jaw tightened. Someone tampered with it. Elena's pulse quickened. "Who has access?" "Only internal staff," Cameron said. "And our Dubai liaison." Alexander turned to her. "You met him on the last call, Khalid's interpreter. What was his name?" "Yusuf al-Sadiq," she said slowly. "He seemed professional." Alexander's voice dropped lower. "Professional doesn't mean honest." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "If that version goes through, they could seize controlling rights to one of our AI patents. We'd lose millions." Elena stared at the papers, mind racing. This wasn't a mistranslation. It was deliberate. Someone wanted to sabotage you. He turned back to her. "Then help me find out who." Her throat tightened. "You want me to spy for you?" "I want you to do what you already do best. Read between the lines." She hesitated. This was beyond translation now. This was politics, deception, danger. But deep down, she knew she couldn't walk away. Because something about this wasn't just business. It was personal. Later that night, as Elena reviewed digital correspondence from Khalid's team, she noticed something odd. One of the attachments, supposedly a financial table, contained embedded metadata in Cyrillic script. Russian. She frowned. Why would a Dubai firm use Russian encryption? She decrypted the file, and a line of text appeared, Phase 1 complete. Next target, Vant Systems AI Core. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just sabotage. It was espionage. She immediately called Alexander. He answered on the second ring. "Elena, check your mainframe security," she said quickly. "You've been infiltrated. They're after your AI models." Within minutes, He was on his way back to the office. By the time he arrived, she had already traced the data breach to an IP address linked to an offshore server, one registered under a shell company in Zurich. When she looked up from her screen, he was staring at her, both stunned and impressed. "You did all this in an hour?" "I told you," she said quietly. "Words are weapons." He exhaled, a mix of relief and disbelief. "Elena, you may have just saved my company." She closed the laptop slowly. "And you may have just stepped into something far bigger than you realize." For a moment, they stood in silence, the city glowing behind them like a field of secrets. Something between them had shifted again, no longer Billionaire and Waitress, but partners standing on the edge of a storm. Would you risk your safety to expose the truth if you discovered something illegal, even if it meant going up against someone powerful? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to predict bad news before it arrived. Elena barely slept. She kept replaying the encrypted message she'd found. Next target, Vance Systems AI core. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was theft, orchestrated by people powerful enough to hide behind layers of digital smoke. When she arrived at the Vance Tower, security was already on high alert. Dozens of IT specialists flooded the building, and Alexander stood in the center of it all, crisp, composed, but colder than usual. He turned when she entered. "Elena." Her voice was steady but cautious. "What did you find?" He handed her a file. "Our system breach came from inside the Dubai communication channel. The false translation was uploaded through a secure line we only shared with one partner." She flipped open the file, a digital trail ending in one name. Yusuf al-Sadiq. Her stomach dropped. "He wasn't who he said he was," Alexander continued. Interpol confirmed the alias. Real name, Yuri Sidorov. Russian national. Former cyber operative. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the photo, the same man who had smiled at her through a video call just days earlier. "So the Russians are behind this?" "Not entirely," Alexander said darkly. "He was freelancing. Someone hired him to infiltrate Vance Systems." "Someone inside," Elena said, her mind racing. "He couldn't have gotten past the firewalls without help." Alexander nodded grimly. "Exactly." She looked up at him. "You think someone in your own company's involved?" He hesitated. "I think Cameron might be." The words hit her like a slap. "Your assistant? He's been with you for years." "That's why it's perfect," Alexander said quietly. "He has access, trust, and plausible deniability." Elena's instinct told her something wasn't adding up. Or maybe you're seeing betrayal everywhere because you've lived too long surrounded by it. He looked at her sharply. "You don't know my world, Elena." "Maybe not," she shot back, "but I know people. And Cameron doesn't strike me as someone with a price tag." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Either way," he said finally, "I need proof. Tonight, the system logs reset. If we can catch whoever's using the back door, we'll know who the traitor is." Elena crossed her arms. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" He glanced at her. "With your help." That night, the office felt like a fortress. Most of the staff had gone home. Only the hum of the servers filled the silence. Elena sat beside Alexander in the dim light of his private lab, watching as lines of code scrolled across the monitors. Her pulse quickened every time the firewall flickered. At exactly midnight, a breach signal appeared, faint, almost invisible. "There," she whispered. Alexander's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm tracing it." The coordinates pinged back instantly. Not from Zurich this time. Not even from outside the building. The source was inside the tower. And the specific access key. Alexander Vance's personal ID. Elena froze. That's your login." He stared at the screen, pale. "That's impossible." But the proof glowed before them. His ID had been used to open the encrypted vault containing his AI prototypes. "Someone cloned my credentials," he said, voice low, almost shaken. "No one should be able to do that." Elena leaned closer, scanning the data. "Wait, Look at the timestamp. It wasn't just any time. It was the exact hour he had been meeting with the Dubai investors 2 weeks ago. So while you were in a conference call, she said slowly, someone here was using your identity to steal from you. Alexander's face hardened. That means whoever did this had access to my schedule, my personal network, my physical keycard. He stopped. Elena, he said suddenly, where were you that day? Her heart stuttered. Excuse me. You were in the building, he said, his voice sharp now. You had access to the same files. You were working late. You even said you noticed something strange in the data before anyone else. Her throat went dry. You think I did this? I think I don't know you as well as I thought I did. The accusation hit harder than she expected. After everything I've done to help you. Help. His tone cut like a blade. Or manipulate. You walked into my life with perfect timing, Elena. You knew Arabic, Russian, all the languages connected to this breach. You found the evidence conveniently. Tell me, should I believe that's coincidence? Tears of fury welled in her eyes. You arrogant bastard. Elena. No, she snapped, stepping back. You wanted someone to blame, and you chose the easiest target. Just like every man in power does when things go wrong. She grabbed her bag, trembling. I don't need to prove my innocence to you, Mr. Vance. Not anymore. Before he could respond, she was gone, the echo of her footsteps fading into the cold night. Hours later, Alexander sat alone in his office, replaying the argument in his mind. Her anger, her pain, none of it had felt like guilt. And yet, the evidence pointed squarely at her. Still, something inside him whispered otherwise. Something human. He opened the system logs again, this time searching deeper. And then he saw it, a hidden folder embedded beneath his ID tag. One that didn't belong to Elena. The file name, C. Vance Backup. Cameron. His stomach dropped. He opened the folder, and there it was, correspondence between Cameron and Yusuf, encrypted plans, wire transfers, and digital keys. It wasn't Elena. It had never been. It was the person he trusted most. When he finally called her, it was past dawn. She didn't answer. So he sent a message instead, just 6 words. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Have you ever been wrongly accused of something, or lost someone's trust unfairly? How did you handle it? Share your story below. Rain hammered against the windows of Elena's apartment like 1,000 unanswered questions. She sat at the small kitchen table, her laptop closed, her eyes unfocused. The tea beside her had gone cold hours ago. Her phone buzzed again, Alexander's message glowing on the screen, I was wrong. Please forgive me. She stared at it for a long time, expression unreadable. Then she turned the phone over and let it rest face down. Forgiveness wasn't something she could give so easily, not after he'd looked at her like she was a criminal, not after he'd made her doubt the very strength that had kept her alive all these years. Across the room, her mother stirred on the couch. Elena, Lucia murmured weakly, you're still awake? Couldn't sleep. Lucia studied her daughter's face, the tension in her jaw, the exhaustion in her eyes. It's that man, isn't it? Elena hesitated, then sighed. He accused me of betraying him. Lucia smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and wisdom. People with power often fear the truth most from those who speak it. I thought he was different, Elena said quietly. But maybe I was just fooling myself. Her mother reached for her hand, fingers trembling. Mi amore, the people who hurt us the most are often the ones who didn't know they were doing it. Don't let anger make you small. But Elena couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. Not anger, not even grief, but disappointment. Deep, bone-deep disappointment. Meanwhile, at the Vance Tower, Alexander stood alone in his office, staring out at the city that now felt colder than ever. The truth lay on his desk, printed messages between Cameron and the Russian hacker, wire transfers, and timestamps that proved everything. Cameron hadn't even denied it when confronted. You never saw it coming, he'd said with a bitter laugh. You think loyalty is bought with paychecks? I was invisible, Alexander. Just like her. That last line haunted him. He'd destroyed the one person who had actually seen him, the one who had spoken to him not as a billionaire, but as a man. He tried to focus on the cleanup, the press statements, the board meetings that demanded his explanation. But every time he opened his mouth, all he could hear was her voice. The one you seem to understand best is pride. And she had been right. Pride had cost him more than any scandal ever could. 3 days passed. Elena returned to work at Billionaire, keeping her head down and her emotions buried. She smiled for customers, carried trays, took orders, all while pretending her world hadn't shifted. Jess, her co-worker, noticed immediately. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" Elena forced a smile. "Just tired." But that night, as she cleaned the tables after closing, the front doors opened, and Alexander walked in. The room seemed to freeze around them. He wasn't in his usual immaculate suit. His tie was loose, his eyes shadowed. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked human. "Elena," he said softly. She didn't stop wiping the table. "We're closed." "I know." He hesitated. "I came to apologize." "Properly." She set down the cloth and turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. "You already did. Over text. I needed to say it to your face." "Why?" "To clear your conscience." He winced. "No. To try to make things right." She crossed her arms. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Mr. Vance?" "Rewrite what you said. Undo what you made me feel." He stepped closer, but she didn't move. "You have every right to hate me. I let my fear get the better of me. I've spent my whole life thinking control would protect me, from loss, from betrayal, from weakness. But all it did was make me blind." Her eyes glistened, though her voice stayed steady. "You didn't just accuse me of a crime. You accused me of being someone who could be bought. Do you know what that means to someone who's spent her whole life fighting to prove her worth?" His throat tightened. "I do now." They stood there for a long moment, two broken pieces of different worlds, unsure how to fit back together. Then he said quietly, "You once told me that words are weapons. So use them. Tell me what I can do to earn yours back." She exhaled slowly. "You can start by believing them." He nodded. "Then believe this. Cameron's been arrested. The company's safe because of you. I told the board everything. You deserve the credit, the position, the future I stole from you." She stared at him, searching for sincerity. And she found it, raw, trembling, real. "But even so," she shook her head, "I don't want your guilt to be my promotion." "It's not guilt," he said. "It's gratitude." "Gratitude fades," she murmured. "Respect lasts." He took a step closer. "Then let me earn that too." Her resolve faltered for just a moment. The rain outside streaked the windows like falling glass, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. "Still," she said softly, "you can start by leaving, Alexander." He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "If that's what you want." She turned away, eyes brimming. "It's what I need." When he finally walked out, the door closing quietly behind him, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was emptiness. Later that night, Elena sat by her mother's bedside again. Lucia reached for her hand and smiled faintly. "You let him go," she said. "I had to." "Maybe," Lucia said, "but something tells me that's not the end of your story with him." Elena looked away, unsure whether to hope or to protect herself from it. Because sometimes, losing someone isn't the end, it's the beginning of finally finding yourself. And in that small, quiet apartment, she realized something. She didn't need his forgiveness or his validation. She already had her own. When trust is broken, do you believe forgiveness should be given easily or earned slowly over time? Share your perspective in the comments. The days that followed moved slowly, each one a quiet test of willpower. For Elena, life returned to its fragile rhythm, early mornings caring for her mother, afternoons at language tutoring, and evenings at Billionaire. Yet something inside her had changed. The pain from Alexander's betrayal had settled into something steadier. Not bitterness, but resolve. It was as if that wound had carved space inside her for something new. Strength, independence, clarity. One afternoon, While her students practiced basic Arabic phrases in the community college classroom, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it at first, but when it rang again, she excused herself and stepped into the hallway. "Miss Moretti," a formal voice said on the line. "This is Amira Saeed, liaison for the United Nations Language Fellowship. I'm calling regarding your previous application." Elena froze. "My application? That was years ago." "Yes," the woman said with a small laugh. "Your file resurfaced during our scholarship review. You were on the shortlist but never confirmed attendance. We'd like to know if you'd still be interested in joining our upcoming program in Geneva." Elena's throat tightened. Geneva. The dream she'd buried beneath bills and responsibility was suddenly within reach again. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Amira replied kindly. "You've earned it." Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'd love to." When she hung up, she pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart race like it hadn't in years. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't reacting to life, she was choosing it. That evening, she told her mother the news. Lucia's eyes sparkled through her fatigue. "You see, Figlia mia, the world doesn't forget people like you. It only waits until you're ready to step back into it." Elena laughed through tears. "But what about you, Mama? I can't leave you." Her mother smiled knowingly. "You forget, I'm tougher than I look. Besides, you won't be gone forever. This is your moment, Elena. Don't waste it because you're afraid of losing what you've already sacrificed for." Elena hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of chamomile and courage. "I love you, Mama." "I know," Lucia whispered. "Now go love your future, too." Meanwhile, at the Vance Tower, Alexander sat in his office, the same office that once hummed with triumph and control, now filled with an unfamiliar stillness. He'd done everything he could to make things right. Cameron had been arrested and confessed. The Dubai partnership was salvaged. The press painted Alexander as the resilient visionary who overcame betrayal. But none of that mattered, because the one person whose opinion mattered most wasn't there to see it. He found himself replaying every conversation with Elena, her laughter, her fire, the way her words disarmed him more effectively than any rival ever had. He realized now that she had changed something fundamental in him, stripped away his arrogance, his illusions, his walls. 4 years, he'd mistaken power for purpose. But Elena had taught him that purpose wasn't about control, it was about connection. And for the first time, Alexander Vance, the man who never paused for anything, couldn't move forward. A week later, he got his chance. It came in the form of an invitation, a press release for a United Nations Fellowship reception in New York. Among the listed participants, Elena Moretti, Linguistic Fellow, Class of 2025. He stared at her name for a long moment before closing the laptop. He didn't know if showing up would fix anything. But he knew he couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. The evening of the reception, the ballroom glittered with diplomats, scholars, and translators from around the world. Elena stood near a tall window, elegant in a simple navy dress, her posture poised but nervous. She still felt like an imposter among these polished people. But when the keynote speaker announced her name as one of the new fellows, applause filled the room. And that's when she saw him. Standing near the entrance, dressed in a black suit, Alexander was watching her with an expression that blended pride, remorse, and something far more tender. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the noise faded. She could have turned away. She could have pretended not to see him. But instead, she held his gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. After the ceremony, she stepped out to the balcony for air. The night was crisp, the city lights glittering like scattered hope. A quiet voice spoke behind her. "You look like you belong up here." She didn't turn. "And you look like someone who's not used to waiting for permission to talk." He smiled faintly. "Still sharp. Still stubborn," she countered. He took a breath. "I didn't come to make excuses. I came to tell you the truth." She finally turned to face him. "Then tell it." "I've spent my whole life chasing success so I'd never have to feel powerless again. But when I met you, I realized power doesn't protect you, it isolates you. You saw through all of it, and I didn't know how to handle that. So I hurt you. Elena studied him quietly. His voice carried no arrogance now, just humility. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But I needed to say thank you for making me see what matters. For reminding me that language isn't just translation. It's truth. She exhaled, emotions swirling too fast to name. You really rehearsed that, didn't you? He laughed softly. I tried. But somehow, with you, I always end up saying what I mean. She looked out over the city. I'm leaving for Geneva next month. I know, he said. That's how I found out about tonight. There was a pause, the kind that held both sadness and possibility. Then this is goodbye, she said quietly. Maybe, he whispered. Or maybe it's a new beginning, one where we're finally speaking the same language. Her lips curved slightly. You're learning. I had a good teacher. They stood there, side by side, not touching, not promising, just understanding. And for Elena, that was enough. Have you ever had a moment when pain pushed you to finally choose yourself, your dream, your peace, your power? Tell me about that breakthrough in the comments. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elena wrapped up her work at La Mer, arranged care for her mother, and finalized her papers for Geneva. Each step brought her closer to the dream she once thought she'd buried forever. But one thing still lingered, quiet and unresolved: Alexander. He hadn't reached out again since the reception. No texts, no calls, no gestures. And though part of her respected that, another part couldn't help but wonder if that night had truly been the end, or if something bigger was still waiting to unfold. It was a week before her flight when the call came. Elena Moretti, said a firm female voice on the other end. This is Detective Lawson from the NYPD Cybercrimes Division. Are you available to come down to the precinct today? Her stomach tightened. What's this about? It concerns the Vance Systems case, Lawson replied. Mr. Vance requested your presence. We believe there's a development you need to see. Within the hour, she was in a black car speeding through Manhattan traffic, her pulse steady but her mind racing. When she entered the conference room, Alexander was already there, pale, composed, but with that storm-quiet look she recognized. Elena, he said softly, standing as she walked in. She didn't respond, her eyes moving to the large screen displaying a cascade of code and financial transfers. Detective Lawson gestured toward it. We've discovered that Cameron wasn't acting alone. Someone higher up in the international network reactivated the malware. They're attempting to drain the remaining AI patent data in real time. Elena leaned closer. How much time do we have? Minutes, Alexander said grimly. And they're using the same linguistic encryption protocols you built. That's why you're here. Her pulse spiked. Wait, the Arabic-Russian hybrid syntax I created? He nodded. It's been twisted into a backdoor. You're the only one who can decode it fast enough to stop them. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. She had sworn to herself she was done saving his empire, done fixing things for men who broke her trust. But then she looked at him. There was no arrogance now, no entitlement, just faith. Elena, he said quietly, I trust you. Something inside her shifted, a small, fierce spark of purpose. Then let's end this, she said. They dove into the code together, side by side at the terminal. The room filled with a rhythmic click of keys, the rising tension of digital warfare. Whoever's behind this, Alexander muttered, they're inside the system already. Elena's eyes narrowed. Not for long. She typed fast, switching languages midstream, layering commands that would trap the infiltrator. Her translation work, her deep understanding of language as both art and logic, came alive in a new way, every word a weapon, every symbol a shield. Suddenly, a message flashed on the screen. Nice try, little waitress. Her blood ran cold. Alexander's fists clenched. They know who you are. It's Yusuf, Elena said. He's alive. The room went silent except for the hiss of static. Then, new lines of text appeared, a taunt written in multiple scripts. Vance thought he could erase me. But he forgot. I speak his language now. Her mind raced. He's rerouting through Geneva's digital servers. He's going after the UN database next. If he breaches that, he'll have access to classified humanitarian codes. Entire translation networks could be compromised. Then stop him, Alexander said. Do whatever it takes. Elena's fingers flew across the keys. She built a trap, reversing his own algorithm. But he was fast, almost as if he could predict her moves. Then she realized he could, because the backdoor he'd created was learning, adapting linguistically like her. It was using her style, her syntax. She swallowed hard. He's mirroring me. Every time I block him, he interprets it as a new command. Alexander stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. Then break the pattern. Speak something he can't predict. Her breath hitched. Something human. She paused for 1 second, then began to type in Italian, the language of her mother, of lullabies and letters written in hope. A language Yusuf's algorithm didn't recognize. Per ogni parola rubata, c'è una verità che non puoi tradurre. For every word you steal, there is a truth you cannot translate. The screen flickered, the code shuddered, and then went dark. The connection severed. The breach was over. Aftermath. The room erupted into applause. Detectives exchanged relieved glances. But Alexander didn't look away from her, not for a second. "Elena," he breathed. "You did it." She exhaled shakily, adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. "No, we did." He smiled faintly. "You turned your pain into power." She met his gaze, softer now. "I learned that from losing it." Lawson stepped forward. "Miss Moretti, we'll need you to provide a written statement, and we'll be recommending you for official commendation with Interpol." Elena blinked. "Commendation?" Alexander grinned, genuine and proud. "Looks like the world's finally catching up to how extraordinary you are." Later, as they walked out into the crisp evening, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, Elena stopped. "You didn't have to call me in," she said quietly. "You could have handled this on your own." "No," he replied. "I could have tried. But I'd rather face the truth with you than win without it." She smiled, tired but luminous. "That's a different language for you, isn't it?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe you're finally teaching me the right one." A long pause stretched between them, not awkward, just full. Then he said, "What happens now?" She looked up at the skyscrapers, at the life she was about to begin. "Now, I go to Geneva. I keep learning, keep building, keep translating the world." He nodded slowly. "And me?" She hesitated, then said, "You keep listening." He smiled. "I can do that." They stood there, two people who had fought their way through pride, betrayal, and loss, and found not perfection, but understanding. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. Have you ever faced a moment when your biggest weakness became your greatest strength? How did it change the way you saw yourself afterward? Share your moment of transformation in the comments. The morning of Elena's flight to Geneva dawned golden, the city bathed in a soft, forgiving light. For once, the world seemed to move in rhythm with her heartbeat, calm, steady, full of quiet anticipation. She stood in her small apartment, luggage by the door, her mother dozing peacefully on the couch. The faint aroma of jasmine tea filled the air. Lucia stirred as Elena tucked a blanket around her shoulders. "Leaving already?" her mother murmured, eyes still half closed. Elena smiled. "You should go back to sleep, Mama. I'll call you when I land." Lucia reached out, touching her daughter's cheek with fragile tenderness. "You've always been strong, Elena. But now you are also free." Those words stayed with her as she rode to the airport, through the waking streets, past the familiar cafe signs and neon lights of the city that had tested and shaped her. It wasn't until she reached the gate that she saw him. Alexander stood near the security checkpoint, his hands in his pockets, looking as uncertain as she'd ever seen him. No entourage, no chauffeur, no wall of importance, just a man waiting. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "You really are persistent." He smiled faintly. "You said you were leaving. You didn't say I couldn't say goodbye properly." She tilted her head, both wary and curious. "And what does properly mean to you this time?" He exhaled, the corner of his mouth twitching. "It means Without pride. Without walls. Just honesty. She crossed her arms. "All right, Mr. Vance. Let's hear your honesty." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You changed everything for me, Elena. The way I lead. The way I listen. The way I see people. You made me realize that success without meaning is just noise." Her gaze softened. "And what is meaning to you?" He hesitated, then smiled. "It's standing in an airport at 6 a.m., hoping the woman I hurt will give me another chance, not because I deserve it, but because she believes people can change." Her heart ached, not from pain, but from the weight of everything they had survived. She shook her head slowly. "You really learned how to speak." "I had a good teacher," he said again, and this time it made her laugh through the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Alexander," she began, but he interrupted softly. "Don't decide now. Just know that wherever you go, whatever you do, you have someone who finally understands your language." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, silver pendant. It was shaped like an open book, engraved in 3 languages: truth, courage, connection. "I had it made for you," he said quietly. 3 words that define what you taught me." Her fingers trembled as she took it. "It's beautiful." "So are you," he said, without hesitation. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No tension, no barriers, just gratitude and quiet love unspoken but understood. Then the boarding call sounded, echoing through the terminal. She smiled gently. "Goodbye, Alexander." He met her eyes. "No, arrivederci. Until we meet again." She laughed softly at that, because for once, he got the translation right. 6 months later. The sun rose over Lake Geneva, scattering silver light across the water. Elena sat by the window of her small apartment, laptop open, papers scattered, a mix of UN translations, student notes, and personal journals. Her fellowship had become more than work. It was her calling. She was helping build language systems for refugee integration, real people, real stories, real impact. Her mother's health had improved, and they spoke almost daily. Every time Lucia called, she asked the same question: "Has the billionaire learned to speak from the heart yet?" And every time, Elena laughed. "He's trying, Mama. He's trying." Because yes, he still called. Sometimes once a week, sometimes not for a month. But every message was thoughtful, never demanding. Just honest connection. And slowly, something beautiful had been rebuilding, not the rush of romance, but the quiet strength of respect and possibility. One evening, after a long day at the UN offices, she found an envelope slipped under her door. No name, just her initials, EM. Inside was a small photo, her standing at the reception in New York, radiant, unaware someone had captured the moment. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were just 3 words. "Still listening. A." She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes as she placed the photo by her desk. Because sometimes, love doesn't end in a dramatic reunion or a sweeping kiss at the airport. Sometimes, it begins quietly, in understanding, patience, and shared growth. Elena had learned that true connection isn't about possession or perfection. It's about fluency, the kind that comes from speaking not with words, but with the soul. And somewhere across the ocean, in his office overlooking the city, Alexander looked out at the horizon, wearing the same quiet smile. 2 hearts, 2 worlds, now fluent in one another's language. Months later, at an international conference in Zurich, a speaker introduced the next panelist. Please welcome linguist and humanitarian advocate, Elena Moretti, and global innovator Alexander Vance, co-authors of the initiative Languages for Peace. As they walked on stage together, the applause was thunderous. Alexander leaned in and whispered, "You see? I told you we'd meet again." Elena smiled. "You translated hope pretty well." He grinned. "Only because you taught me the words." And as they stood there, partners, equals, and proof that redemption speaks louder than pride, the audience saw not a billionaire and a waitress, but 2 souls who had learned the greatest language of all, understanding. Do you believe 2 people from different worlds can truly understand each other, not just in words, but in heart and purpose? Share your thoughts and what you took from this story in the comments below. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you.